And I'm WJCL 22, Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson in Savannah.
All right. So, Jeremy, it is Tuesday. It is 10 a.m. That means it's time to track the tropics. And, my friend, we've got some things that we are watching out there.
Yeah, we have two areas of interest. And how about this? Since we last talked, we also had our first hurricane of the season. So we'll discuss that and kind of recap that in a little bit. What Eric was alluding to in the southwestern Atlantic right now, we have an area of interest. And then also that probably moved into the far eastern Caribbean now, that kind of disorganized area of showers and thunderstorms there that he's showing right now, the Invest 95L. That was something we thought at one point may get it designation as a tropical depression, maybe even a tropical storm, but probably not going to happen now.
No, there's a lot of wind shear, a lot of dry air. So Invest 95 continues to show lower and lower development chances. At one point, the National Hurricane Center had this tagged as having a high likelihood of developing. Now it's a 10% likelihood. So probably not going to see this going. But it's not a bother to either your community or my community. So not a big deal there.
Yeah, and now it has no land in front of it for quite a while, so probably not going to develop. And again, as we say, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah. All right. The other area, though, the next area to watch, sitting just off of both of our coastline, it hasn't been tagged as an invest yet, but it's also just starting to bubble up some clouds at the hour.
And that looks way better in terms of what's out there than I would say 12 hours ago. I mean, when I was on last night at 11, it was like barely even see anything, maybe a minor little swirl around there, but there are some showers and thunderstorms, and this now does have around a 20% chance of development. So not necessarily a high-end chance, but it could at least push some tropical moisture our way late this week.
Yeah, and, looking at this, the good news is it doesn't have a ton of opportunity to develop before it runs into both your coastline and my coastline. So we're not looking at this threat of a massive hurricane or anything like that moving in, but there is some low-end development chance over the next couple of days. Could we see a tropical depression form? It's possible, but I don't think that it even matters. I think at the end of the day, and I don't know about you, but like our forecast is starting to tweak wetter and wetter late this week into the weekend.
Yeah, I had Friday locally is the highest rain chance in my area.
Yeah.
It looks like this will just end up being some rain. I know some people in my viewing area, as long as we don't get some big bad tropical system, a lot of people like to get some rain around here. Some areas have had continually to get hit by the same pop-up thunderstorms. Other areas have been missed here for probably 1 to 2 weeks. So if we could get maybe a little more widespread rain, but the downside when you start talking about tropical moisture is you can get some localized street flooding and some issues from that just because of how much moisture is hanging around with them.
No, 100%. And what's interesting about this, Jeremy, is that when we look back at the hurricane forecast you and I published months ago, back on March the 1st, this actually does tie into that forecast in terms of not only timeline, but also of location.
Yes, and we had that southwestern Atlantic, maybe near the northern Bahamas. And as we have told people time and time again, when we come back through these parts of the pattern, we're just looking for the reflection, maybe an area of low pressure. It's really when you get into more of the peak months of hurricane season that, maybe watch out a little bit more. And so right now we're in that, yesterday this was tagged as an area of interest on the 24th. Now we're the 25th. So maybe a couple more days down the road, this will be towards land. And then we'll have to watch, especially probably week 2 of September.
Yeah, I definitely think, and we can get into the long range stuff a little bit later on, but I definitely think that looking at the overall pattern, seeing this reflection is a big indicator that this part of the pattern will probably be nice and active come that second week in September. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think we start getting into later August with some of those other timelines we've hinted at, and then into that kind of early to mid part of September. That might end up being the busiest stretch we see of the entire hurricane season. And people are like, well, obviously it's the peak of the season, but also these are things we've identified back in March 1st.
Right, and it's it's there's more to it than just, well, yeah, it's the peak of hurricane season. I mean, we're highlighting locations, we're highlighting specific days, so kind of interesting. So at this point in time, though, the tropics remaining nice and quiet. Jeremy, I think it's interesting though, because while the tropics are remaining nice and quiet, relatively speaking, the season as a whole has been anything but nice and quiet.
Yeah, typically you only have about 12% of activity in June and July, and I'll let you go through the numbers, but we're above average.
Oh, yeah. So thus far this year, remember we did have that January system. So we've had 5 named storms. The average through today's date is 2.5 named storms. I know you don't have a half a storm, but you get the idea. Last year through today, we had 3 named storms. And what's particularly interesting is the named storm days. We have had 19.5 days tracking a named storm. The 30-year average is 7.6 named storm days. Last year we had just shy of 4. So we've had a pretty good chunk of time watching systems. And Jeremy, why don't you take the ace? Because the ace is the big place here to kind of show the overall scorecard.
And that is accumulated cyclone energy. So it gives us a little better determination of kind of the tropical activity that we've had for the season so far. That's at 16.2. Average is 9, and you're like, well, when should we hit 16? That number within the season, and that typically comes up on August the 17th. So we're running a good 3+ weeks kind of ahead of schedule. Last year, the ACE was at 2.9. I can't remember the exact number when we started August, but remember last year, August had 0 named storms.
Right, and August is really when we typically ramp things up. The peak of hurricane season, give or take averaging, is about September 10th, September 11th. So we're at the foot of the mountain. We are looking up, and we know over these next few months, the activity should really increase. That said, though, the water temperatures are still running in absolute record territory across the entire basin, Jeremy.
Yeah, and obviously warm water is one of the big keys to tropical development. But we have 2 areas of interest. One of them had a high chance of development, but there are other ingredients that go into place. So if it was solely about water temperatures, that thing would have blown up. Who knows? Maybe been a hurricane, but there are other factors at play. And certainly the warm water, eventually, when we get some of these systems going, could really blow them up quickly.
Right.
And take a look at Hurricane Don. It wasn't a hurricane for very long, but that was not in an area that necessarily is a big breeding ground for hurricanes. But North Atlantic, those temperatures are above average. And that finally got into an environment where it could develop. So it did feed off some of those warmer waters. So they definitely are in play along with other ingredients, but talk about this down near the Keys.
Oh yeah, well, so just talking about water temperatures, there was an interesting article that was put out talking about sea surface temperatures. Now we have for a while, Jeremy, you and I talked about these unbelievably high water temperatures across the Keys, and how if we get a hurricane down this direction, it's going to be a problem. This is a look at temperatures this morning, okay? The last data coming in is at about 8:30 or so. And let's just take a few minutes and go backward in time and look at some of these numbers. This was at peak heating yesterday. I'm going to just bring this full screen here because it's really remarkable to look at. 95s, 96, and I saw a 97. Now, that said, these are hourly reports. Manatee Bay, okay, which is right in this area, yesterday reported a water temperature at a depth of 5 feet, by the way, okay, at a depth of 5 feet. So you're not just talking about a buoy, you're talking 5 feet down. Jeremy, it hit a water temperature of 100.2 yesterday. 100.2.
I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Now, that said, so that's near Key Largo, okay? That said, though, the problem here is we don't have records. You know, the highest observed that's like published and able to find is 101.1, and that was in, I believe, Is it Kuwait Bay? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So you're talking about Kuwait Bay, right? Like
Right.
the Persian Gulf.
Right.
Florida Keys, very different climate, right? And it's truly remarkable. Even if take a world record out of it, okay? You're talking about a major, at the very least, a major ecological issue because of bleaching of coral, sea life, etc., etc. But you put a hurricane, and that's my greatest fear, that a hurricane just cruises through the Keys or something. You put a hurricane into water temperatures that are running 96, 97, 98 degrees. I mean, thankfully, it's a fairly small pocket of water, but it's like rocket fuel.
Yeah, and I think something that would be horrendous this hurricane season, assuming these water temperatures stay, is if you had a tropical system maybe split between Cuba and the Keys, or head over parts of the Keys in South Florida, and just remain over the water instead of having a land interaction where it would weaken it.
Right.
So it definitely will be interesting to see once we start getting some systems, and then if we get any that are closer into the coast. And I think you and I are in agreement that at some point this season the luck probably will run out, just in terms of getting some sort of system closer. And obviously we had Arlene, that was early in the year,
Right.
Didn't really do much, and then it kind of curved right around Florida. But later August, maybe into early to mid-September, that's probably the time frame we're watching the closest, at least within our forecast.
Either way, we've got indications that there is landmass that has an above average threat, right, to landfall. Mm-hmm. And we highlighted this months and months ago, back on March the 1st. So for residents that live in these areas, which does include my area, and friends up like in the Outer Banks, to me, we absolutely have to watch the August into September, because if just look at Florida, like there's South Florida, that is an area that has water temperatures yesterday, that bay, Manatee Bay, is right there, highlighted in red with the above average chance of a tropical hit, if you will. Right. That's where we had the 100-degree water temperature yesterday. Now, the air temperature was 97. There wasn't much wind, so it kind of makes sense that you could get that. But that is an area that is under threat this year in our forecast. So it's possible that you get a storm coming ashore, tapping into some of that heat energy, and you've got yourself a storm that is rapidly intensifying right up to landfall. And that, and that's not hyping. That's just looking at data. If you've got a storm that's able to become a hurricane, why wouldn't it tap into that water temperature?
And I think that's why we have seen our forecast, again, March 1st, we went 14 to 18 named storms. We had 7 to 9 hurricanes, and I believe somewhere centered around the average for major hurricanes. There are the numbers. I think it was in the last week or so, we saw another hurricane forecast come out that jumped their numbers. What was it? The
Weather Company.
Weather Channel.
The Weather Company
updated their numbers, and now they were going 20 named storms.
Yeah, and you and I have discussed this, and maybe their numbers are a little high. I think, though, that everybody is hedging bets on this idea that the water temperatures are just straight up boiling.
Right.
But as you've mentioned, that's one piece of the puzzle there.
Yeah, and I think, though, as we start going into August, we're going to get a good test here, because we're going into the pattern where the main development region is going to start having more of these lows,
right? Or
at least thunderstorm clusters move out. Are we all of a sudden going to get like 3-4 named storms very quickly right in a row, and then you're up to like 8-9 named storms, and then you're not even into September yet, and then you get more activity. So we're not saying our forecast will sort of be most accurate or another one will be. It's we're going to find out, though, here soon, kind of what that development region looks like. But you're showing the dust, which is sort of tempered the activity a bit.
Absolutely. And that's why we've been looking, that's why in our forecast methodology, we've been looking at the reflections, the little pieces that kind of indicate where the pattern was wanting to be the most active, and that piece off the coast of the Florida Georgia coastline out, between us and Bermuda, that's a reflection. Come the next version, when this Saharan dust should be significantly squelched, one would think that that's going to be a pretty significant indicator. But look, across the open Atlantic, we still have a ton of dust. Across the Caribbean, across the Gulf of Mexico, there is a ton of dust, and more dust coming off the coast of Africa. So once that dust turns off, which it will in the next few weeks, once that happens, Jeremy, I think you're absolutely right. I think we get our first test to see just how much this rocket fuel is set, so that once you start lighting matches, how quickly do we start fires, for lack of a better term. And as I'm saying this, I definitely feel like this is sounding alarmist. I don't mean to be alarmist. It's just, I think things are going to wake up.
Yeah, and some of the longer range models, I think we need to watch maybe week 1 of August, maybe somewhere in that 4th to 8th, 9th, 10th, somewhere off from. I still think it should be somewhere off from the east coast of the U.S.
Yeah,
and that is tied to kind of the cycling back of that unnamed storm in January, and that would be probably the first thing to really watch as we go into August, and then our Carolina part of the pattern starts to come back the last about 10 days or so of the month, and that's when we would probably watch more maybe off the southeast coast or towards the Carolinas. Somewhere really between the East Coast and Bermuda is what that part of the pattern is a little more about.
Well, and I think this morning, interestingly enough, I think the GFS model is kind of hinting at that, as you had mentioned, right?
Correct. That model has, again, it's famous for developing these hurricanes way out into the model, and it definitely has had something running kind of from the islands or Bahamas off the east coast of the U.S. is a look of maybe a hurricane. The 6Z run didn't necessarily do that, but it did put that area of low pressure where, or very close to where we think it should be coming up, maybe off from the Northeast or the Mid-Atlantic or New England come that first week or so of August.
Yeah, so let's take a look at it, all right? So this is the GFS, this is the 6Z run, and we'll go to the different model runs just for perspective, of course. But what I've done is I've highlighted the mean sea level pressure normalized anomaly. So in other words, we're looking for higher than normal pressure and lower than normal pressure, okay? So just taking a quick look into the Caribbean, bottom right corner, you see the blue shades, that's Invest 95, lower pressure moving into the Caribbean. And then just east of Florida, you see that white dot, that's kind of closer to normal pressure in a sea of high pressure. So in other words, that's that little piece of energy out east of us. So there's the GFS model trying to show that moisture in the Caribbean doing its thing and kind of fading. The stuff around Florida, Georgia coastline, not really wanting to do much, so no big deal there. Let me widen this perspective back. Notice center bottom of your screen, that white dot. That's something that the model is trying to develop. You kind of see that blue dot there working into the northern Caribbean islands. Now, that's what Jeremy had talked about. These other model runs had brought it. You see how that blue kind of fades over the Dominican Republic and Haiti and just becomes nothing as it works over to Cuba? Let me back that up, and let me go from the current 6Z run to the 0Z run. Notice the 0Z run intensifies it and kind of recurves it. Okay? The run before the 18Z run brings it same path. We go back 3 model runs, and it kind of brings it into Florida. Okay, but back to the current run, kind of weakens it out over the, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, does nothing really with it, and eventually brings some moisture over toward the Yucatan Peninsula. But while that happens, notice off the northeast coast of the United States, right there, August 9th, Jeremy, that's kind of the exact same spot that January 16th system had formed. And correct me if I'm wrong, is this not the same time frame in the weather recycling pattern?
It is. It is. So somewhere the farther we get into week 1 of August, maybe even to the start of week 2, something just with all these longer range models really hinting at, hey, there might be something out in that area, and then we look back and, yep, there's that unnamed storm part of the pattern. So with above average water temperatures and a little more favorable look maybe in some of the other things that we look at, I think that definitely could be something brewing out there. So that's just maybe the first thing in August we'll really keep a close eye on.
And then after that, Jeremy, we would start to look mid to late August toward the Carolinas and then eventually back toward Florida, correct?
Yes. So really we have to watch that back half of August and then into early to mid-September. I don't want to say the front half of September because, as we know, we kind of had that like maybe 13th, 14th, maybe around the 15th of September highlighted.
Yeah.
So it might not be exclusively the first half of September, but we really have a few of these parts of the pattern picked out. You can always kind of look through our forecast. And then I think without question, we'll probably start to get the main development region, some stuff fired up in there. And maybe it's just something where we get these storms going and then they hit some of that drier air or wind shear and they fall apart. And we just get a name out of it. But so far, I would say so far, hurricane season's been behaving in terms of keeping a lot of these storms away from our area.
But here we go into the peak of season when we know, like a toddler, behavior cannot be guaranteed, and that's why we're doing this. We're doing it every Tuesday, regardless of activity. And then once things start to get brewing, I have a feeling we're going to be doing these a bit more often.
Yes, I think somewhere in August we might start to get busy, and then we could be seeing a lot of each other here come September.
If nothing else, I think an interesting closing thought, Jeremy, is just the idea that the thinking of El Nino is going to squash hurricane season. I think that we need to remember that you can't just look at one dynamic, and you've harped on this beautifully this morning. I think you can't just look at one dynamic and say, "Oh, that's the ball game." We really have to say, "Well, let's take a balance of there's, El Nino and water temperatures and wind shear and all these things." And I think that that's the biggest thing with weather is knowing what we know, but also knowing what we don't know and understanding that there's just so many things that work in tandem together.
Right. So El Nino, again, it has strengthened a little bit here in the last few months, could strengthen a bit more. We'll see what type of influence that has, but is it going to shut down hurricane season altogether? Probably not.
Yeah. Very good. All right. Do you have anything else to add?
No, I think we're good. And I would say go. Anyone can review our forecast anytime. We've had it out since March the 1st. You can go through, look at some of the dates, our forecast numbers. Maybe next time we chat, we can go back and take our forecast, which hasn't changed, and then show everyone kind of the trend of the others that have. And just look at that. And of course, by then, we'll be into August.
Yeah, that works for me, my friend. All right, listen, be good. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for hanging out with us, everybody. I'm meteorologist Eric Burris from WESH 2 here in Orlando.
And I'm Chief Meteorologist Jeremy Nelson at WJCL 22 in Savannah.
All right, we'll see y'all later. Thanks, bud.